In this video I'm going to share my experience of hiking and camping the Tour du Mont Blanc, which I did this July. I've already done a video where I talk about the gear that I was taking when I was in the packing and preparation stage. I've also done a video after the hike, no narration, just with some background music and some clips from my 12 days hiking and camping the route. In this video I want to go into a bit more detail and share my experience a bit more thoroughly, including maybe touching again on the gear, on the itinerary that I followed, where I camped, some of the things that might help you plan your own TMB adventure. If you watch the gear packing video, you'll find all the gear that I took. One of the key things that you need to consider is your sleeping bag. I took this one here, which is the Thermarest Quaystar 32 or 0 degrees C sleeping bag. The comfort rating is actually 5 degrees C, which in July in the Alps was absolutely fine. I never camped higher than 2,200 meters and I was always comfortable. I had the option to wear some more layers if it did drop a bit lower. I went back to the Alps a month later, so in August, went back with my wife and we summited Mont Blanc. We did our first 3,000 meter peak and we did a lot of camping down in the valley and a bit of wild camping higher up. And that late in the season, I did think that actually the sleeping bag could be a little bit chilly if the temperature dropped, because the weather was noticeably a lot more changeable. There was more rain, there was more wind. There could even be snow further up as you get later into the season. So if you're thinking of doing the TMB in late August or in September, you might consider using a slightly warmer sleeping bag. This is something that when I was researching, I was struggling to pinpoint clear guidance about what rating sleeping bag do I need in this month or at this time. So to give you some insight, July and August are the peak times, from the 15th of July to the 15th of August. After the 15th of August, the weather does start to change a bit. You get more storms, you get much more varied weather. So I'd say if you're doing the TMB in late August or in September, you might find you want a slightly warmer sleeping bag, something with a 0 degree comfort rating. And remember, if you're female, then you need to look for different comfort ratings because women tend to sleep a little bit colder. The tent I took for 2 people was the Alp Kit Jaren 2, and you can see my review video of that tent, which I actually recorded when I went back to the Alps in August, and that held up really well. It was really lightweight, but at the same time durable, and it was up to the job of surviving 2 storms in the Alps during the Tour du Mont Blanc. Of course, if you're doing this solo, you just want a 1-person tent, then the Alp Kit Polestar is probably my recommendation. I've also made a review video of that. There's also the Soloist, and they're more budget options if you don't want to spend twice as much or another kind of 30-40% for something like an MSR tent. Now the backpack that I took is the Gossamer Gear Mariposa 60 litre, which is this one here. As you can see, it's very lightweight, super lightweight, weighs less than 1 kilogram. There's not much to it when it's empty, but when you pack it full, it can carry quite a lot of load. I tried to keep my base weight as low as possible. Now normally the Tour du Mont Blanc is spoken about as being 170 kilometers or 170 plus kilometers with 10,000 meters of elevation gain. According to my Garmin watch, the Instinct 2 Solar, I did over 200 kilometers with nearly, I think, over 12,000 meters of elevation gain. And I did do a couple of extra bits to reach some 2,700 meter summits, but that's a lot of walking. And every kilogram you've got in your bag, it makes a big difference. In the planning stage, I didn't look at the route. I didn't think about where I was going to sleep. I spent most of the time before I went just looking at how do I get my pack size to a comfortable size? How do I get my pack weight to a comfortable weight? I used the website Lighterpack, which is a really good free resource where you can weigh everything, put everything on there and look at where can I reduce some of my weight. Now a couple of things about this backpack that I really like. In the back, the thing that gives it kind of a bit of padding in the back, this thing, you can just take this out and use it as your sit mat. The other thing with the Mariposa 60 litre is this side pocket, which actually I can stuff my entire tent in here. If the outer is wet, I can just pack it away in the morning, stuff the outer in here, and then later when it's a bit warmer I can get it out, put it in the sun and dry it out. And that means that I'm not putting anything wet in the main compartment of the bag. Now even with this ultralight backpack and having all very light gear and using the Lighterpack website and just investing a lot of time in getting my pack down to a really good weight, in the beginning you've got trail runners passing you and people with day packs, because lots of people are not camping the Tour du Mont Blanc, they're staying in refuges, they have luggage transfer. So on the very first day I was kind of looking at people, chatting to people, And I was quite envious, thinking, oh man, you know, going up this hill, this bag feels really heavy. This guy, he's just living his best life with this tiny little backpack. He's going to get to a refuge and then have a nice hot meal cooked for him. But actually, I soon stopped feeling that way when I met other people who were camping the DMB, and they had packs that were twice as big, twice as heavy. And that made me feel a lot better about my pack. The whole experience is going to be defined so much by how much weight you're carrying, because it's a lot of distance, it's a lot of ascent. So I would say do what you can to get your pack weight down. A really, really useful thing is the water filter. It filters out all the harmful stuff, most of the harmful stuff I should say. Now this just packs down super, super small. It doesn't weigh much at all. Now for the first few days there was water everywhere. You're walking under glaciers, there's streams, there's waterfalls, there's just water everywhere. You'd fill up your bottle, you'd walk 100 meters and there'd be another opportunity to fill up your bottle. And a lot of this water you wouldn't really need a filter for, but that's not always going to be the case. So I would really strongly recommend getting a water filter. It's such a good investment. This cost me, I think, £60, and it will do, I think, 1,000 litres of water. So this smart water bottle was my actual water bottle. It's been through quite a lot with me this year. 850 millilitres. And that was for drinking, that was for cooking, because I had this. The section towards the end near Le Brevant was a bit of a desert. It was like being on the moon, it's just rocks. And the area when I camped near Lac des beautiful area for wild camping. The lakes are basically stagnant water, and I did actually have to take water from the lake, so I was so glad that I had this. In terms of cook system, I took an MSR Pocket Rocket. This is the Pocket Rocket 2, which I bought afterwards, because the first one was lent to me by a friend, and an Alpkit titanium mug, 650 millilitres. You can see my video where I talk about my cook system if you want to know about that in more detail. And the food that I was taking was Huel hot and savoury, and I also talk about that in that video. So if you're interested in how to do ultralight cooking, if you can call it cooking, it's just putting hot water in dried food, then you can watch that video. So I won't bore you with that here. Now in terms of guidebooks, I also read a lot of people's, blogs and reviews and things about which guidebook was the best. And something that struck me about the Cicerone one, it covers it clockwise and anti-clockwise. And some people had said they basically took a Stanley knife and cut it in half, which I thought, as a book lover, I'm not sure how I'd feel doing that. And other people said they felt that they just carried half the book's weight pointlessly, because it makes sense. You're not going to do it both ways. You're either going to do it clockwise or anti-clockwise. So I counted that one out for that reason, even though it's a popular one, and I got down to two options. This one is VP, Tour du Mont Blanc. This book I really, really loved. This was the one that I reached for. This is the one that I used to guide me the whole way. I really liked that the maps were OS style maps, so I could read the map in a way that it just makes sense to me. This one, Trailblazer, really, really popular. For some people, you might love this. I absolutely hate this. This just hurts my head. Some people might love that it's got loads of details that the traditional map wouldn't have. This tells you where there's phone signal, where there's electricity lines. A really nice thing about this book, and this was the only time I really reached for it, was because it had some wildflower identification pages, some kind of wildlife stuff. But actually, there are so many wildflowers, the vast majority of them I couldn't even find in this book. So of these two books, I bought two to kind of have a flick through before, which I didn't end up doing until I was on the plane to Geneva, but also so that my friend could carry one, I could carry one, which meant in the night time, if she wanted to kind of do a bit of research for herself, or we wanted to just sit and flick through the books, we could. But in the end, this one barely left the bag. I wouldn't buy it again, but that's just my personal preference, because those hand-drawn maps, they just do not speak to me. I did find in the end that actually if I sat down and read it, it tells you what there is in each town. It tells you like there's a really good outdoor shop in this town where you can get camping food. This book doesn't have any of that. So that was really useful from this one, the Trailblazer. So just from my personal experience with the types of guidebooks I like, this would be my recommendation. There's loads of information for the planning stage, but also you've got sections with the time points that it lists on the maps and on the itinerary, and it tells you the distance, the walking time, trekking time, fast packing time, and trail runner time. And with that you've got the itineraries, so you can You can kind of pick your pace if you're trail running it, staying in refuges, or fast packing or whatever. I stuck to the 10-day itinerary, which I ended up doing in 12 days because we had a bit of a rest day in Courmayeur with the storm. And then the final day we split in two just to get an extra wild camp in, and that was really nice actually. Why rush it? It's such an amazing experience, and the wild camping especially was one of the highlights for me. So in this book you've got a kind of overview map. This is not going to be detailed. You can buy a proper kind of OS style map, a big fold out map to go with this book if you want. I didn't bother because for each section you've got the kind of zoomed in, more detailed map. This page was really useful. This is the elevation profile, which helps you to look at set and thinking, what's tomorrow going to look like? Okay, there's a really big incline. Let's try and do that before it gets too hot in the valley. Or thinking about just planning the route in general. I like to think, we could camp halfway down this big descent, so we're not just absolutely smashing our knees for 8 hours or something. It's really useful to have that. Those kind of zoomed in maps are really useful, even especially if you're wild camping, to look at kind of where the roads are if you're near civilization and you're worried about wild camping illegally in Switzerland or in Italy, because you can wild camp above 2,500 meters. So that's something to bear in mind. But with a map, you can plan ahead and look at, okay, that's quite thick forested area, that area looks quite flat. So that's where your map reading skills can help you to plan your wild camps. All of the different variant routes, they're all in there as well. One of my favorite parts of the route was a variant, which was the Col des Forts variant. I'd really recommend that. And now I'll talk you through exactly what my experience was doing the Tour du Mont Blanc. It started with a flight from London to Geneva, a night in a hotel in Geneva, a Flixbus to Chamonix, which is only a couple of hours, a few hours spent in Chamonix. I used an app called Bounce to find luggage storage, and it wasn't too expensive. We were able to leave some stuff behind we weren't going to need until after the hike. We got a bus to Les Houches, which is where the TMB traditionally begins, and we paid for a night's camping at a campsite called Bellevue, which was nothing special, it just did the job, and meant that the following morning we could just get up and start our Tour du Mont Blanc. So starting in Les Houches, you start to ascend through woodland, and then you come out to these spectacular panoramic views. Keep your eyes peeled for wild strawberries, and if you haven't got one, I'd recommend a sun hoodie. It really protected me, the back of my neck, my forearms, from the sun, and meant I didn't have to carry as much sun cream. In terms of the weather, doing it in July, you should be a lot more worried about being hot than being cold, so think sun cream, think about protecting your head, taking a nice lightweight cap or a sun hat, something that's nice and packable. It was 30 degrees a lot of the time, and you're going uphill for 6-7 hours sometimes. In terms of the gear I took, there's just two things I think I'd change. I would take some very lightweight, more breathable trail running shorts instead of hiking shorts, because I was just so hot a lot of the time, and I'd also not take waterproof shoes. I'd take some that are more breathable. On the first day, a lot of people go further than we did to get to the town of Contamine, Montjoie, but we stopped at Refuge de Miage, and I would 100% do this again. It's a beautiful, small, traditional refuge that's been in the family for, I think, 3 generations, and there's a free bivouac site there where you can just pitch your tent. There's running water nearby, it's coming straight from the glacier, and they're really friendly in the refuge. You can ask them if you can get dinner there, and we paid for a soup. In the morning we went and paid for a cup of coffee, so it just meant we didn't have to dip into our own supplies too early. And since we didn't stay at any refuges, having lunch or dinner or a cup of coffee allowed us to just, see what the vibe was like in the refuge, which is a big part of the experience, I think. Day 2 started off with quite a short but steep incline, and then a more gradual descent down to the town of Contamine. town of Contamine is so picturesque, and there's cafes, restaurants there. We got a coffee and some soup, and there's also a Carrefour supermarket, so it's a really good place to stock up on some supplies before the nice, gentle, more kind of flat walking through the Contamine Valley. There's a refuge that you pass quite early on, so some people stay there, I imagine, but we continued to the next place, Refuge de la Balme, where there is another free camping spot, an aire de bivouac. So this is another place where you can camp for free. You just need to be careful. You pitch your tent after 7 p.m. and you take it down before 9 a.m. Somebody did actually get fined by the police while we were there, so they do check, so it's something to watch out for. At the aire de bivouac, where we spent the second night, there is a free toilet you can use there, and if you want a hot shower then you can pay, I think it's €8 to use the shower at the refuge. So €8 is a lot of money for a hot shower, but if you're desperate it's a lot cheaper than staying as a guest at the refuge, that's for sure. On the ascent towards Col de Bonhomme, we started to encounter more and more snow, but given that it was July and the weather had been quite hot, there was never any problematic snowfields. A lot of the snow bridges over rivers had already collapsed, and many of the snowfields you could just go around them instead of over them. Col de la Croix de Bonhomme, there is a refuge there by the same name, which actually saw some action in World War II, and now is a good place to get a pizza or a beer or some food to have a bit of a rest before deciding whether to continue on the main route or to take the variant. We opted for the variant, which is called Col des Forts, and for me it was one of the highlights of the TMB. Firstly, it avoids you going down to a town to then have to come back up the other side to Ville des Glaciers. Lots of people have no choice but to go to that town because it's from there that you can get transfers to hotels and things like that if you're doing a bit more of a luxury Tour du Mont Blanc. But for us camping it, this was amazing because we went from the really busy main trail to what felt like wilderness. In the section we walked in the morning up to lunchtime, from Refuge de la Balme to Refuge du Col de la Croix de Bonhomme, we'd seen literally hundreds of people, and in the kind of 8 or so hours, 7-8 hours we were on the variant, we saw less than 10 people. We saw actually more ibexes than human beings, which for me was perfect. There's an option here to go up to Tête Nord des Forts at 2,756 meters. It's only an extra couple hundred meters or so of ascent and about a kilometer in each direction, if that, so it doesn't add much time, but it gives you a much more panoramic, well, a truly panoramic 360-degree view, and you can see back down into the valley you've come from, the Contamine Valley, where we spent the night before, and across to the Mont Blanc Massif, down into the valley from Col des Forts, where we'd be heading next. After coming down from that optional summit and rejoining the main route, we caught up with a couple of girls from the US who we'd got chatting to earlier and had lunch with at the refuge, and we walked the rest of the variant route with them. It was really nice on the TMB that you can meet people from all around the world. Ville des Glaciers is where the main route and the variant route meet up again, and this is somewhere that you can camp for free. It's not really an official bivouac site, but when I spoke to a local farmer, he said that by the public toilets near the car park is where people can camp, so we spent the night there. The next day we knew we'd be crossing the border into Italy, but actually after checking the weather forecast, which was printed and pinned up at a refuge in the area, we found out that there was going to be a big storm that was going to last for quite a while, so we were eager to pick up the pace and try and get all the way to Courmayeur. Here at the Italian border was the first time that I was personally able to get phone signal in a number of days and speak to my wife back home. My friend who I was with did actually have phone signal now and then at some of the places we stopped, like in Contamine, where I wasn't able to get signal, so it does depend on what network you're using, but not having guaranteed access to the internet and to communications with people back home is definitely something you should bear in mind. Eager to reach Courmayeur before the storm hit, we decided to run for a little bit, which days later I regretted slightly because there was a really big descent down to Courmayeur and we both experienced knee pain after that descent, and probably the run that we did before didn't help things much when we were carrying about 10 kilograms each. That said, it was great fun and such spectacular scenery to look at while you're running along, and this part of the hike was actually relatively level compared to other bits until you reach the big descent. It was strange getting to Courmayeur and leaving all of that nature behind, but this was a great place to grab a pizza, weather the storm and stock up on supplies before continuing. My companion decided it was time for a rest day and a hotel, somewhere we could have a good night's sleep and air all the kit out, because the tent had survived the storm but it was very wet, and I decided I wanted to not miss any bit of the route, so I did a bit of a solo trail run to fill in the gap between the city centre and the hotel where we were staying at. I ended up doing a lot more than I needed to and picking up a part of the variant route and a part of the main route, but it was a really awesome solo run. One thing I'd say is that it's really up to you if you think it's important to complete the entire Tour du Mont Blanc just on your own 2 feet without using any lifts or taking a bus, skipping a section. It's really all about the experience you want to have. Day 6 was one of the other big highlights of the TMB for me. We did the main route, which follows the Whaleback ridge, and that gives you views into both valleys either side of the ridge. Interestingly, despite being the main route, this was really quiet. We saw less than 10 people all day long, and that's because most people opt for one of the variants. So from Courmayeur you've got 3 options. There's a couple of different variants. One of them, which is the most popular, is called the Contour Trail, and it follows the contour line a bit lower down, going down the sides or skirting around the Whaleback Ridge and offering a more direct and more level route to the next refuge, which is Refugio Bonatti. Certainly if it's bad weather and you're not going to see these spectacular views, you might as well opt for the low level variant, but other than that I would really strongly recommend doing this main route. I couldn't believe how quiet it was, and then all the people we spoke to after this that had gone for that lower level variant, and you know, they didn't know what they'd missed out on, but I knew, especially this solo detour I did up to see some ibexes at a 2,700 meter summit, which is one of the highlights not just of the Tour du Mont Blanc but of my life so far. Like I could have spent hours up here just sat with the ibexes and soaking in the spectacular views all around me, but my friend waited for me down at the col with my backpack, so I had to get back down, get back on the TMB trail. try our luck for some dinner at Refugio Bonatti, a really famous mountain refuge, and luckily they had space for us. It was quite pricey at €30, but it was a 4-course meal and they get all their supplies helicoptered in. It was nice to chat to other people doing the TMB, but we couldn't stay for long because the sun was setting and we had to find somewhere to spend the night. After coffee at Refugio Elena and making a slight wrong turn because of a fallen and twisted sign, we eventually made it to the Swiss border. Now I don't want to sound like I'm hating on Switzerland, but if there was one bit of the TMB that I would skip if I was really short on time, I only had maybe a week and I just wanted to pick up the highlights, I would probably skip the Swiss part. If you just walked this section of the TMB, you would find it spectacular, undoubtedly, but when you've just been spoilt with days and days of amazing snow-capped mountains and marmots and ibexes and just constant views of the Mont Blanc Massif, this section can feel a little bit like you're just trying to get from A to B. You do pass through some really picturesque little villages. There's some interesting woodland with a cave that we found, and there's like an educational mushroom trail that you follow, which can be quite cool if you want to do a bit of mushroom foraging. We found this kind of old military bunker that was built into the rock, which was quite cool, and we decided to set up camp in that area because they already had some kind of fire pits there. In the morning we didn't have to walk far before reaching Lac. There is a campsite there. I don't know how expensive it is at Switzerland though, so it's probably pricey, and I really enjoyed that wild camp in the forest. From Champé you've got options because you can actually do the Fenêtre d'Arpet variant, which I would do if I were to do it again, and if I didn't have like knee pain or I wasn't in need of just slightly easier walking. That would probably be a way to spice things up a little bit on this section of the route, which is otherwise a little bit boring in relative terms of the rest of the TMB just being like the most wildly amazing experience ever. There's a small shop at Col de Faucla, but there's nothing in Trient or La Poutie except for a refuge where you can get a meal. We'd spent the night beside this refuge in La Poutie, where there's a bit of a kind of like a bivouac site. It's run by the local authority, but you do have to pay a few euros or a few francs to stay there, and you can pay a bit more for a hot shower as well. After 2 very sweaty hours of just pure ascent, we reached the French border, and I can't describe the feeling of elation at seeing the Chamonix Valley where we'd begun our trip, seeing the side of Mont Blanc that we'd seen when we started our TMB hike 10 days before, and seeing that the end was in sight. Not because I was looking forward to getting to the end, you kind of lose the sense of the distance you've traveled because you're just turning corners, going from valley to valley, and to actually look at something that you saw 10 days before, it's a kind of crazy feeling. It really puts into perspective the distance you've covered. This part of the hike is just stunning. You get amazing views into the next mountain range, and I ended up going back to do some hiking in that range in August. After a lot of descent and then a lot of ascent to get back up, we finally reached the section that I'd been really excited about, which was the section of ladders. If this terrifies you, there is a variant that avoids most of the ladders, but they're really easy to use, they feel really secure, I'm sure they're checked really regularly, and this was a really efficient way to gain a lot of altitude. This was actually the day that we did the most ascent. It was a really big day. We could have camped down in Argentière, so there's a campsite down there. I was keen to do a wild camp at Lac Blanc, but it did mean quite a big day to get there. Despite being a nature reserve, it's perfectly legal to do a one-night bivouac at Lac You're not allowed to camp at Lac Blanc, the next one, so this is a good spot to stop and to set up your wild camp. Please respect this environment. The water is crystal clear. It looks really inviting, but it's crystal clear because people haven't swum in there with, their shampoo. They haven't put laundry detergent in there. It was a beautiful spot where we had ibexes around us and just an amazing place to wild camp. You do need to go onto the website and log that you're going to wild camp just so they can keep track of how many people are doing it, but you are allowed to do your bivouac there. Just set up your tent after 7 p.m. This could have been our last day on the TMB, and indeed it was the last day for the people that we camped with the night before and we walked with the day before, but we didn't want to have this huge day and get back to Les Houches because we didn't have our Flixbus back to Geneva or our flight home for a couple more days, so we had time to have a leisurely morning to chill a little bit by Lac Blanc. And this was all kind of part of our plan. We were trying to follow a 10-day itinerary, but we gave ourselves 12, even 13 days to do the route if we needed, with the way we booked our coaches and our flights, because you can't guarantee if there's going to be a big storm that will last for 2 days, or if you roll an ankle, if you need a rest day, or if you just get somewhere where you're like, actually I want to spend a whole day just looking around the shops in Courmayeur. We didn't want to feel that pressure of needing to push on and stick to the itinerary. And that allowed us to just make it up as we went along and have greater flexibility about when to stop and where to stop. This was our final ascent on the TMB and the final section of ladders, and it was like a lunar landscape on Le Brevant. There was very little in the way of water except for the snow that was lying around. I did think we might end up having to try and find a bit of snow without rocks in it and boil it down and then filter it, but in the end we found a tiny bit of running water. It was just kind of like springing out on the footpath, so we were able to take from there. The other option was of course to filter water from Lac du Brevant, which isn't actually on the TMB route. This here is the TMB route, but we had to kind of come off of that and do a bit of a detour and a bit of descent down to set up our wild camp by the lake. There was a storm that evening which we weren't expecting, but we were set up just before the storm started, and then it was dry again in the morning.
Very nice.
By this stage we'd well and truly run out of food, so we had a coffee and some jam on toast in a refuge and watched all the paragliders with Chamonix down in the valley below us before starting the long and continuous descent down to Les Houches. I really tried to not let my feet carry me too fast and to just savour this final section of the TMB. And that's the summary of my experience hiking the Tour du Mont Blanc. If you have any questions, anything I've not covered, please just drop it in the comments and I'll get back to you.